We often think about the dangers of driving our cars, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But have you ever really stopped to consider the folks who, help us out when things go wrong on the road?
I mean, like the tow truck drivers, the roadside assistance people.
Exactly, those people, the ones who show up when we're stranded, maybe feeling pretty stressed out.
And what might surprise a lot of people is just how dangerous their job actually is. It's really quite risky.
Totally. And for this deep dive, you shared some, well, really compelling info. There's that January 2024 report from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety.
Right. And that 2025 overview, the one called Highway Heroes at Risk, kind of says it all, doesn't it?
It really does. So our mission today, I guess, is to really dig into the hidden risks these workers face. Why is this becoming such a big concern, and what can actually be done to make things safer for them?
Yeah, we want to get beyond just the surface stuff, uncover some of the maybe surprising facts, and look at potential solutions.
Exactly. Because when you picture someone helping on the side of the road,
Mm.
maybe you think, okay, flat tire, dead battery, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Simple stuff.
But the reality, and these reports really hammer this home, is that these folks are often working inches away from live traffic.
On high-speed roads, too.
Yeah, high-speed roads, all sorts of conditions, day, night, good weather, bad weather. It's just inherently a really risky situation.
And the data really backs that up. So let's
Yeah.
maybe start with a finding from that 2024 AAA Foundation study that was, well, pretty eye-opening for me. It really dug into the numbers of roadside assistance providers, or RAPs, who've been fatally struck by vehicles. What did they find there?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this because it is pretty shocking. So the AAA FTS study found that between 2015 and 2021, get this, 123 roadside assistance providers were fatally struck by vehicles.
123. Wow.
Right. Now, what makes this so significant is that if you look at the traditional national crash databases, like the FARS system, they only identified around 34 such deaths in that same time frame.
Wait, so only 34 in the official records.
Yeah.
But the real number is closer to 123.
Exactly. That means the national data is capturing less than 30% of these fatalities.
Less than 30%. That's a huge gap. So why? Why such a massive underreporting? What's going on there?
Well, it seems like it really boils down to how crash reports have historically been set up. The forms just haven't typically had specific boxes or codes to identify someone as a roadside assistance provider.
Ah, okay.
So if, tragically a tow operator was hit, they might have just been put down as a pedestrian or or just someone working near a vehicle.
So they just get lost in the data.
Yeah.
Misclassified.
Precisely. That lack of a specific field means their job role, and therefore the real danger level just wasn't being accurately tracked.
And like the 2024 report points out, that underreporting has some pretty serious consequences, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you don't have an accurate picture of the problem's scale, how can you possibly allocate resources effectively? Or, develop policies that are actually targeted to fix it?
It's like trying to fix something when you don't even know how broken it is.
Yeah.
It highlights a real systemic issue with the data collection itself, doesn't it?
It really does. So, okay, beyond just the sheer number, which is already alarming, the AAA FTS report also dug into the specifics, the circumstances around these fatal crashes, and some of the details paint a really concerning picture.
Okay, so what kind of characteristics did they find were common in these tragic incidents?
Well, first off, location. The vast majority, 89%, happened on roads where the speed limit was 55 miles per hour or higher.
Okay, so fast roads.
Very fast. And 85% were on limited access highways, like freeways. And 68% were specifically on interstates. So yeah, we're talking high-speed environments where any mistake by a passing driver can just be devastating.
Yeah, that makes sense. Higher speed means less reaction time, much worse impact. But what about, weather? You might assume bad weather plays a big part.
That's what I thought too. But the study found 84% of these fatal crashes happened in clear weather, on dry roads.
Really? Clear and dry?
Yeah. So it wasn't mainly rain or snow or ice, but darkness was a big factor.
Yeah.
63% of the fatalities happened during hours of darkness.
Okay, darkness.
And here's something really alarming. 41% of all these deaths happened where there was no roadway lighting at all, just dark.
Wow. So you've got this mix of high speeds and poor visibility. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Right.
But there was another finding that really stood out, wasn't there? Something about vehicles leaving the road.
Yes. This was particularly striking to me. In 63% of these fatal crashes, The vehicle that actually hit the roadside worker had already left the travel lane. It was on the shoulder or even beyond before the impact happened.
Some here, 3% had already left the lane.
Yeah.
That's huge. It suggests that even if the worker is doing everything right, positioned off to the side, they're still incredibly vulnerable if a driver loses control.
Exactly.
And that makes you wonder why these cars are leaving the lane, right?
Yeah.
What's causing that?
Right. And the study looked into that too. So of the drivers who hit someone and were actually tested for alcohol, and it's important to note, only about 60% were tested.
Okay, so a fair number weren't tested.
Right. But of those who were tested, over a third, 34%, tested positive for alcohol, and 28% were actually over the legal limit.
Wow. So impairment is clearly a major factor. And like you said, with only 60% tested, the real number involving alcohol could be even higher.
Could be. It's a really concerning statistic. What about where the workers themselves were positioned when they were hit?
Well, thankfully, the majority, 63%, were outside the travel lanes, on the shoulder or median,
Okay, that's good, mostly.
mostly. But disturbingly, 32% were actually within the travel lanes when the impact occurred.
Still almost a third. That really shows how vulnerable they are, even if they're trying to follow safety protocols.
Yeah, and the fact that so many incidents involve vehicles leaving the roadway, it really makes you think, like just making the workers more visible or just relying on drivers to obey move-over laws, maybe that's not enough.
Right. Because if a driver is impaired or super distracted or maybe falling asleep and they lose control, those measures might not stop a tragedy.
Exactly. Which raises that big question. How do we tackle those underlying driver behaviors more effectively?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really points to the need to address drunk driving, distracted driving, fatigue. All that stuff has to be part of the safety strategy. And the report also mentioned a sort of worrying trend, potentially increasing fatalities during that 2015-2021 period they studied.
Yeah, definitely something that needs more monitoring. So, okay, the AAA FTS report gives us this really detailed, almost granular look at the fatal crashes. But that other piece, the Highway Heroes at Risk overview, it gives some broader context, right? What does that add to the picture?
Well, it basically just reinforces how incredibly dangerous this job is. It pulls together analysis showing the fatality rate for tow operators and roadside responders is something like 15 to 16 times higher than the average for all other industries combined.
15 to 16 times higher.
Yeah, 15 to 16 times.
Yeah.
I mean, that's truly shocking when you hear it put like that. It just puts the danger into stark perspective. Statistically, being a tow truck operator is one of the riskiest jobs out there.
That really drives the point home. And that overview also mentioned some scary stats about just regular people being hit outside disabled vehicles, didn't it?
It did. Apparently, between 2017 and 2021, almost 2,000 people were struck and killed while they were outside a disabled vehicle. And over 75% of those happened after dark.
Wow. So it's not just the professionals, it's anyone stranded on the roadside who's incredibly vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And that Highway Heroes piece kind of touches on why this is such a problem, mentioning things like just more traffic on the roads, way more distracted driving, and the fact that compliance with those move-over laws is often, well, pretty bad.
Right. I saw a recent AAA survey mention that a big chunk of drivers who don't move over either don't think it's dangerous not to, or they don't even know the law exists in their state.
That lack of awareness, or maybe just carelessness, it's a huge problem.
Definitely. So, okay, given this pretty bleak picture, what are some of the main recommendations coming out of the AAA Foundation research? What can actually be done?
Well, maybe unsurprisingly, a big focus is on strengthening those slow down, move over laws or SDMO laws, really pushing awareness campaigns and trying to get compliance up.
Makes sense. Reminding drivers constantly, slow down, give space.
Seems like step one, right? If drivers don't know the law or why it matters, it won't work.
True. But the recommendations go further than just the laws.
Oh, yeah. They also talk about developing actual countermeasures to protect workers from those out-of-control vehicles we mentioned. Things like maybe temporary energy-absorbing barriers or advanced warning systems.
Okay. Physical protection.
And also enhancing safety training for the RAPs themselves. Yeah. Really emphasizing techniques like, try to avoid working on the side facing traffic whenever possible, minimize your exposure time.
Right. Focus on both preventing the crash and reducing the risk if one happens. What about those high-speed zones where so many deaths occur?
Yeah, that's a key focus too. Prioritizing safety efforts in these countermeasures, specifically on those high-speed, limited access highways. And circling back to the data problem we talked about, a really crucial recommendation is improving crash data collection. updating the forms they mention using the MMUCC, the Model Minimum Creation Criteria,
Right, the standard forms.
to specifically identify incident responders like RAPs and gather way more detail when these types of crashes happen.
Because, like we said, bad data means you can't really understand the problem or track if solutions are working.
Exactly. And the AAA Foundation also looked at specific technologies, things you can use on scene, right?
They did, like lighting. They recommend using LED light bars, faster flash rates, specifically between 1 and 4 flashes per second, and those alternating wigwag patterns to grab attention better. But they also warn about managing the intensity so you don't cause glare, especially at night. And they suggest boosting passive visibility too, like more reflective tape on vehicles, maybe using those inverted V patterns or black and yellow markings.
Makes sense. And what about those vehicle-mounted variable message signs, the VMS things? Did they look at those?
Yes, and this was a really positive finding. They found that turning on a VMS, like displaying a flashing diamond symbol or something, increased the odds of an approaching car moving over by a huge 95%.
95% increase. That's massive.
Massive. And they also found VMS helped reduce speeds too. So yeah, AAA strongly recommends service fleets adopt VMS.
Wow, 95%. That's really remarkable. It suggests there's a powerful psychological effect from that kind of active dynamic warning that maybe static signs just don't have. Makes you wonder how we could use similar dynamic messages elsewhere for safety.
Definitely seems like a promising technology. What about the more traditional stuff like cones and flares?
Yeah, they looked at those too. They found cones and flares are effective at getting drivers to shift lanes away from the incident, especially at night, if you use certain lighting patterns with them.
Okay, so they help with lane shifts.
They do. But they weren't as good at getting drivers to actually slow down.
Yeah.
And there are practical issues, right? Like how long they take to set up and, flares can be a fire hazard in some places.
Sure.
But still, AAA recommends using them because they can positively influence driver behavior.
Yeah.
And then there are broader ideas like maybe expanding move-over laws to cover any disabled vehicle with its hazard lights on.
Ah, interesting.
And really pushing for the adoption of the safe system approach to road safety overall.
The safe system approach. Okay, if we really went all in on that, what would that actually look like? For roadside workers and for us drivers?
Well, fully embracing the safe system approach would mean a pretty fundamental shift. It's about designing the whole transportation system, roads, vehicles, speeds, to basically expect human error and to minimize how severe crashes are when they inevitably happen. So for roadside workers, that could mean things like more forgiving roadside designs, maybe vehicle tech that helps prevent cars from drifting out of their lane, stronger rules around driver behavior. For drivers, it reinforces that idea that safety is everyone's job. Constant vigilance, following the rules.
It sounds like AAA is definitely pushing for a multi-layered strategy, recognizing that there's no single magic bullet here.
Exactly. And the Highway Heroes overview also mentions the safety measures that are sort of standard practice already.
Right, like PPE and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Personal protective equipment, high-vis vests are standard. Protocols for setting up the scene, using the service truck to block traffic, putting out warning devices, vehicle lighting like we discussed, and of course, training on safe procedures, equipment use, assessing the scene, recognizing hazards, communication protocols too.
But as you hinted, these existing measures have their limits, right?
They absolutely do. How well they're applied can vary. And ultimately, the roadside worker often has to make really fast decisions under a lot of pressure. And like we kept saying, those slow down, move over laws, even though they exist everywhere, they suffer from the huge lack of public awareness. Plus, they're inconsistent from state to state, like which vehicles are covered, exactly what drivers have to do, the penalties, and enforcing them is tough.
And crucially,
they don't really help with those drivers who leave the road entirely because they're impaired or distracted or whatever. So yeah, SDMO laws are necessary, but they're definitely not the whole solution.
Which brings us to the sort of the bigger picture challenges and where we go from here.
Right.
What are the main hurdles we need to clear to really improve roadside safety?
Well, it's a mix of things. Driver behavior is huge. The impairment, distraction, fatigue we keep mentioning, that's a tough nut to crack. Then there's integrating new technology and the cause that comes with it. Getting more consistency in the laws across states and actually enforcing them better. Fixing those data gaps is still critical.
Training, too.
Absolutely. Consistent, effective training and building a really strong safety culture within the industry itself. And you can't ignore the economic pressures that sometimes make it harder to invest in safety.
Lots of challenges. But the reports also point towards some promising directions for the future, right?
Opportunities.
Yes, definitely. That fuller implementation of the safe system approach we talked about, that's key. Continuing to research and adopt advanced tech, like connected vehicles that can warn drivers, or better driver assist systems,
Yeah.
ADS. That can make a big difference down the road.
And focusing enforcement.
Yeah, more targeted enforcement and public education campaigns, using the data to guide where the effort goes, improving how data is linked and analyzed, maybe even systems for reporting near misses to learn from those, and just more collaboration and standardization across the whole industry. It really sounds like it needs a multi-pronged collaborative effort from, well, everyone involved.
It really does. Drivers, policymakers, the towing and recovery industry, technology companies, everyone needs to be part of the solution.
Absolutely. It's just so clear that protecting these highway heroes needs this comprehensive, ongoing commitment.
So, yeah, wrapping up, the main takeaway has to be that roadside assistance providers face these really significant and often totally underestimated dangers every single day they clock in.
And thinking about that stat, what was it? 63% of incidents involve vehicles leaving the lane. It really makes you wonder, what broader changes do we need? In driver culture, maybe? Road design? What would actually make the biggest difference there?
It's a big question.
Or, considering how badly underreported these deaths are, what are the ethical implications of not even fully grasping the scale of this occupational hazard? Knowing these risks and knowing we don't even have the full picture, what's our responsibility just as drivers to keep these folks safe?
It definitely makes you think.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how important it is for each of us to just pay attention when we see someone on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Make that conscious effort. Slow down, move over if you can safely.
Yeah.
And maybe tell other people about these laws too. Spread the word.
Yeah, good advice. If you listening are interested in learning more, definitely look up your own state's move over law, see what it says.
Yeah.
Check out the work the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety does, or follow some of the industry safety initiatives.
Definitely. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us into what's really a critical safety issue.